The day Elara was sold, no one cried for her. Not her stepfather, who pocketed the gold with trembling hands. Not her stepsister, who smirked from the doorway. And certainly not the pack elders who arranged it, who saw her as nothing more than a convenient solution to an inconvenient problem. "The Beast King needs an Omega," the head elder announced, his voice echoing through the pack hall. "Someone to tend his household." The way he said it made Elara's stomach turn. Everyone knew what it meant. Everyone knew the stories. King Matthias, the scarred one, the alpha who hadn't been seen in public in 7 years, not since the fire that destroyed half his face and killed his first mate. They said he'd gone mad with grief, that he raged through his castle, destroying furniture, terrifying servants, that 3 Omegas had already been sent to him, and all 3 had fled screaming within days. They said he was a monster. And Elara, quiet, orphaned Elara, who'd done nothing wrong except exist as a burden to her stepfather's new family, would be the 4th sacrifice. "Please," she whispered, but her voice was so soft no one heard her. They never did. The journey to the northern mountains took 3 days. The guards who escorted her didn't speak to her. They didn't even look at her. On the 2nd night, she heard them whisper by the fire. "Poor girl. Better her than someone who matters. Do you think she'll last a week?" Elara pulled her thin blanket tighter and stared at the stars. She'd stopped crying after the first day. Tears didn't change anything. They never had. When the castle finally emerged through the mist, all dark stone and towering spires, it looked exactly like something from a nightmare. The gates opened without a sound. No servants waited to greet them, just silence and shadows, and the weight of something broken pressing down on everything. The guards practically threw her bags at her feet before fleeing. And then, she was alone. Elara stood in the grand entrance hall, her breath misting in the cold air. The castle was beautiful once, she could tell. Tapestries hung in tatters on the walls. Furniture lay overturned. Claw marks, deep, desperate, scarred the wooden panels. This wasn't the home of a king. This was the cage of something in pain. "You're the new one." The voice came from the shadows at the top of the staircase, rough, deliberately cold. Elara's heart hammered, but she didn't run. Where would she go? "Yes, Your Majesty," she said softly. "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't call me that." He moved slightly, just enough for the firelight to catch him. Elara saw broad shoulders, a powerful frame, and... Her breath caught. Half of his face was destroyed. The scars ran from his temple to his jaw, twisting the skin, pulling at his mouth. His left eye was clouded, barely functional. The fire had taken everything, his appearance, his mate, his place in the world. She didn't scream. She didn't gasp. She didn't even flinch. She just looked at him, really looked. And for a moment, something flickered in his good eye. Surprise, maybe, or suspicion. "Your room is on the east wing," he said finally, his voice flat. "Stay out of my way. Don't speak to me unless necessary. Don't..." He paused, his jaw working. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" Elara asked. "Like I'm still a person." He vanished back into the darkness before she could respond. The first week was suffocating in its silence. Matthias was a ghost in his own castle. She'd catch glimpses of him, pacing the battlements at night, sitting motionless in the throne room, destroying another piece of furniture, in fits of rage she could hear echoing through the halls. He never spoke to her, never came near her. But Elara noticed things, the way he'd stop in doorways, as if fighting the urge to turn around, the untouched meals outside his chamber door, the fact that despite his reputation, he'd never once threatened her or raised his voice in her direction. He wasn't a monster. He was drowning, and no one had ever thrown him a rope. If this story is touching your heart, imagine what else is waiting for you. Subscribe now, because the best transformations are just beginning. It started with soup. On the 8th night, Elara made a simple vegetable stew. the kind her mother used to make before the fever took her. She left a bowl outside Matthias's door, as she'd done every evening. This time, she didn't walk away. She sat down on the opposite side of the hallway and began eating her own portion, her back against the cold stone wall. After 10 minutes, the door cracked open. Matthias stared at her, his scarred face half hidden in shadow. "What are you doing?" "Eating dinner," Elara said simply. "Somewhere else." "It's warmer in the hallways than in the kitchen," she lied, "and quieter than my room." It wasn't true, and they both knew it. Matthias stood there for a long moment, something unreadable crossing his face. Then, slowly, so slowly it seemed to hurt him, he picked up the bowl and retreated into his room. The door didn't close all the way. The next night, Elara sat in the same spot, and the night after that. She never tried to talk to him, she just existed nearby, a quiet presence in his world of isolation. On the fourth night, he spoke first. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Elara considered the question carefully. "Should I be? Everyone else is." "Everyone else doesn't know you," she said gently. "They know the stories, but stories aren't always true." A long silence stretched between them. "The scars," he said finally, his voice rough with disuse. "They're not who you are," Elara interrupted softly. "They're just something that happened to you." She heard him inhale sharply, as if her words had struck him somewhere deep. That night, when she stood to leave, his door opened a little wider. Slowly, painfully slowly, the walls began to crack. Matthias started appearing, more. First just in the hallway during their evening meals, then in the library, pretending to search for books while she read by the fire. Then in the garden, watching as she tried to coax life back into the overgrown roses. He didn't talk much, but he listened. When Elara mentioned that she'd been sold because she was worthless, something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You're not worthless. My family thought so." "Then, your family," Matthias said, his voice low and fierce, "were fools who couldn't recognize a treasure when they held it in their hands." Elara looked up at him, her heart doing something strange in her chest. He was looking at her like she mattered, like she was real, like she was seen. The turning point came during a storm. Thunder shook the castle walls, and Elara found Matthias in the throne room, standing before the covered mirrors that lined the walls. His hands were clenched into fists, his whole body trembling. "I used to look at these every day," he whispered. "Before the fire, I was vain, proud of my appearance, my strength, my perfect mate, my perfect life." His voice cracked. "The fire didn't just take my face, it took the lie I'd been living." "What lie?" Elara asked softly, stepping closer. "That I was worth something because of what people saw on the outside." He laughed bitterly. "Now they see the truth, the monster I always was beneath." "No," Elara said firmly, and something in her tone made him turn. "You're not seeing clearly." She crossed to the nearest mirror and pulled the cloth away. Matthias flinched, turning his scarred side away from the glass. But Elara moved in front of him, gently, so gently, placing her hand on his jaw, turning his face back toward the reflection. "Look," she whispered. "Really, look." "I can't." "Yes, you can." Her thumb traced the edge of his scars, feather-light. "You see a monster, but I see a man who lost everything and survived. I see strength. I see someone who hides away because he's afraid, not of scaring others, but of feeling the pain of rejection again." Tears were sliding down Matthias's face now, cutting through the scarred tissue. "I see someone," Elara continued, her voice breaking, "who showed me more kindness in silence than my own family did in 20 years. Someone who listened when no one else would. Someone who made me feel, for the first time in my life, like I deserved to take up space in the world." She met his eyes in the mirror, both of them scarred and whole. "You taught me that I'm not worthless," she whispered. Let me teach you that you're not a monster. Matthias turned to face her, and for the first time since the fire, he didn't hide his scars, didn't turn away. Elara, he breathed, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. I see you, she said, all of you, and you're beautiful. His arms came around her then, crushing her to his chest. As 7 years of grief and isolation finally broke open, he buried his face in her hair and wept deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire frame. And Elara held him like she'd wanted to be held all those years when she was invisible, unwanted, alone. They held each other like two broken things, finally finding their missing pieces. The next morning, the castle felt different. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been shuttered for years. Matthias opened them himself, standing in the light without shame. When the servants finally returned, tentatively, expecting the rage they'd fled from, they found their king in the garden with an omega, planting roses together. Send word, Matthias told his captain of the guard, his voice stronger than it had been in years. The castle is reopening, and we'll be hosting a celebration. He looked at Elara, and the softness in his expression made her breath catch. I want the kingdom to meet my queen. The celebration came 3 weeks later. Nobles from across the territories arrived, their faces masks of barely concealed shock and pity when they saw Matthias's scars. But Matthias didn't hide. He stood tall, Elara at his side, and addressed his people with a truth he'd learned in the darkness. For years, I believed the fire made me a monster, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. I hid from you, from myself, from life. I thought my scars defined me, that they made me less than what I was. He took Elara's hand, lacing their fingers together. But this omega, sold to me as punishment, given to the beast as a burden, she saw what I couldn't. She didn't look at my scars and see a monster. She looked into my heart and saw a man who'd forgotten his own worth. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. She taught me that true strength isn't in perfection. It's in surviving, in choosing compassion over cruelty, in opening yourself to connection even when you're terrified of being rejected again. Matthias turned to Elara, his eyes, both of them shining with emotion. I thought I was broken beyond repair, but she showed me that broken things can still be whole, that scars are just proof we survived something that tried to destroy us. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. She didn't fix me. She reminded me I was never truly broken. The hall erupted in applause, but Elara barely heard it. She was lost in Matthias's gaze, in the way he looked at her like she'd hung the stars. And you? She whispered. What did you teach me? Matthias smiled, a real smile that transformed his scarred face into something radiant. That you were never worthless, that you were always meant to be cherished, and that sometimes, he leaned down, his forehead touching hers, the people who are sold as punishment become the greatest gifts we could never have earned. Your Majesty, she teased softly. Matthias, he corrected. Just Matthias, when it's us. Matthias, she breathed and kissed him. Years later, when travelers asked about the famous Beast King and his Omega Queen, the stories had changed. They no longer spoke of a monster in a castle. They spoke of a king who learned that true beauty lives in kindness, of an Omega who proved that worth isn't given, it's inherent. They spoke of two people who'd been discarded by the world and found in each other exactly what they'd been missing. They spoke of the greatest truth, that we're not defined by what breaks us. We're defined by who we choose to become after. You've just witnessed a transformation. Want more stories that remind you of your own strength? Subscribe and join thousands who've discovered that the best stories are the ones that help us see ourselves differently. Your journey is just beginning.